Hello out there, Internet. This is Bracey coming at you for the Comic Crusaders, and today my special guest is the one and only co-creator of the legendary comic book Faust, Mr. David Quinn.
Hey, hello.
Hey there, man. It's a real pleasure to meet you. This is my first time talking to you, so I can't tell you how jazzed I am because I am a long-time Faust fan from way back in the day, and I have quite a few questions to ask you.
Appreciate it. To everyone who's stuck with us over the years since '87, my God, thank you. We were never accused of being fast, but we always gave it our all. So, thanks for sticking with us.
Well, that's not the first question on my list, but it is one of my questions. So let me get into that. Haven't had the pleasure of meeting Tim Vigil a couple of times at Heroes Con. He told me he's notoriously slow, and if you look at his artwork, you can surely understand why. How did that affect the production of Faust, having somebody who's so meticulously detailed, but that's going to come at a cost of time?
Um, Besides being a writer of fiction, I spend a lot of time as a writer of business. In fact, it's the main reason I'm able to be a writer of fiction,
Hmm.
because I'm kind of what you might think of now, after 20 plus years in the business. I'm actually sort of a semi-retired person who's working on only things that I own or co-own,
Very nice.
and I'm working exclusively on things that I initiate or that I initiate with other creators like Faust or Night Vision, or this new thing I'm working on called The Addiction, which I can tell you about. Um, it's it's a life I've chosen. But what I have to choose is I also have to let every book be itself. And that means it's not just about the business. It's not just about pumping monthly books out to the superhero shops. It's also let the book be itself. If it's going to tell an adult story, let it go that way. If it's going to tell a story for toddlers, let it go that way. Be truthful about what you're presenting. And then when you have your collaboration, don't be the fool who tries to fit an artist who might do 2 books a year into the 12 books a year slot, where he'll be miserable or she'll be, failing by their own standards and maybe even by the audiences. So I couldn't ever tell our team that Faust had to be a monthly comic book, which would have made it, easier to sell consistently, and it might have had, business like ongoing for years, like The Walking Dead or something like that, which is, an alternative black and white book. But because they figured out a monthly formula, they were able to keep it going. So I always found other things to do, fill my time. For writers, it's, we could probably write more books than artists can draw, unless you're Jack Kirby. So
Machine.
we might be able to do a few things a month, and maybe an artist needs, a really meticulous artist who really does research and really does layers and layers of prep drawings. Do you see what I'm saying? It's kind of a long-winded answer, but it's basically, I always go, I cannot make someone be who they're not. So I couldn't make Faust, the way we were producing it, be anything but what it was. So if we had time in between issues, and sometimes we had a lot of time between issues because comic industry went up and down,
Yeah.
It's history now, but there was a huge boom that was giving us some extra money and we could afford to do it. But then there was a huge bust and distribution wars, which we're having traces of again, and just terrible business, and our friends in the shops going out of business, and distributors going out of business, and that would, who's gonna get your book into people's hands then? So the reason I'm mentioning that is sometimes I have to really do all business writing, and I might be thinking about, while I'm exercising, I might be thinking about writing fiction, but I might be delivering, websites or speeches or training documentation or pitch books or you know, whatever I could write. You know, I studied writing, and I started wanting to be a rock star, and had some success at that, and you know, but I was never going to be. You know, when I was in the music business, and when I made a record, the people that were selling records that year were Bruce Springsteen, Michael Jackson, Madonna, U2. I was never going to be any of them. I wasn't even going to be Billy Idol. I was the little guy who came in the little bus and was on before Billy Idol. And people would, you know, I'd have great, huge audiences for this because I could reach that plateau of being the opener. But, you know, I saw the writing on the wall. So I went to writing, and I just threw myself back into it. And, you know, since then I've been doing every kind of writing I can. I still write music, but every kind of writing I can that I could either publish, share with people, read aloud to people, present as a comic book I was excited about, and or get paid. Has to be one or the other.
It's kind of weird you say that. I found I was just watching an interview with Dale Keown the other night, and finding out a surprising amount of comic book artists or writers actually wanted to be rock stars or still play music as a side gig or hobby or just for fun now. But there's a couple of really great takeaways from that. I mean, it's a long-winded answer, but you've actually it's nicely layered with some important information. And I'm an artist and writer myself, and I'm more of the typical brand where like I'm all about the creativity and not about the business, and that has been to my detriment. So for those of you out there who have similar aspirations, take a hint from this man right here. It's very important to have that business side down as well, so you can keep yourself in good straits and well fed and in a position to do what you want to do later in life, as David here is doing. I also like the fact that you are apparently an artist writer. You know, you understand that, like, you know, I can maybe write a script in a couple of days, but, you know, this guy is going to be spending 10, 12, 14, maybe even 16 hours a day on a page. It's important to understand what the artist is going through. And as an artist, I really appreciate hearing that from a writer. Speaking of which, did you and Tim have anything of a Kirby Lee relationship? Did he have any input on the action going on in the comics, or was it just like, you know, I'm laying out the script and, like, you know, whatever pictures you think were best for that? Or did he have some story input?
He had total story input. Look, he had done grips before I even worked with him. And we started, I was teaching English for a paycheck and producing my strange little plays about hell off Broadway and in weird, you know, underground theater in Brooklyn and Manhattan and sometimes Boston if I was lucky. And, you know, I had been a comic fan since 1974 when I was in, you know, like still in school, but I hadn't really considered it as my stage. I'd done the music, I'd done the theater, I'd done the business writing, and, you know, I only did comics because someone said to Tim, a friend of ours at Baez, who was a comics retailer, he later got a business degree and went into business. He said, you should work with this guy. He's a writer. He can help you. You know, you're great, but I think maybe you need a collaboration to make it, you know, fully three-dimensional and really take it over the top. And so I helped him do the Omega book, which was also published as Omen when there was a bit of a cease and desist on the use of the name from Marvel. Yeah. This is ancient times, right? So, you know.
Marvel was very litigious back in the day, all the way up until the 90s, as I recall.
But anyway, you know, I guess the point I was making was he was always a storyteller. Vigil was and is. Oh, there it is, yeah.
Yeah.
And he was looking for me to help complete, finish, polish, add extra drama, add character, add the color that comes when you hear voices.
Mm-hmm.
But, he already had the story, the first issue he'd drawn. And there were words. And he's done other books where he does everything. Sometimes, I show him, I send him something. Like, people may not realize this, but we're always sending each other ideas or starting an idea. We have lots of ideas that we eventually decide, no, it's just not good enough. It's not going to be up there with Faust and the Wrath. We're not going to do this now. We'll come back to something else. So we're always working on something. And he'll start a story, and he'll have an idea what the story is. And or I'll start a story, and I'll, of course, know what the story is, and I'll know what a lot of things look like. But it was never like, emailing a script that's finished and not going to change, right? It was always like, here's a drama, here's what happens, and here's what people say, and it's what I think, and it's got some notes to you inside. And it's more of an intimate collaboration, because then there's going to be a conversation, and there's going to be back and forth, and there's going to be thumbnails. We'll all sometimes go, here's a Lee and Kirby moment, right? Where instead of Stanley going, oh, this guy on the surfboard's really cool, Jack. Do more with that guy. Instead of that, it's like, I'll say, what's this? Oh, okay, cool. Oh, all right. Why? And it's back to what I was saying before. Why would I be so, why would I shoot my own foot off and not take input from an artist? I'm working with a new artist now on a new book for children, totally different world, picture book. Because I'm writing it, it's got lots of loud sound effects, lots of crazy, creepy, but cute, because it's kids, toddlers, characters. It's for the grandchildren of the Faust reader. So, why would I shoot myself in the foot and not take advantage of everything an artist wants to contribute? And why would I shoot our book in the head and make an artist do something he doesn't want to do? I know, I've seen, art writers have to get over themselves and understand that if you write something that someone can't or won't do, you're not going to get a good result. Exception being sometimes you will sort of respectfully challenge an artist to go out of their comfort zone.
Sure.
Something, right? And an example, there's an issue of Faust where Dr. Jade DeCamp and John Jaspers, the main anti-hero, are finally making love, and it's kind of different than the killing and the rape and the violence and the aggression and everything we've seen in the Nightmare of Madness so far. And so to give it a different feeling, I was looking at Tim's work in progress, and I noticed that there was no background in a beautiful scene. Well, they're in embrace, and you can just feel the heat and the sensuality and the emotion. And she's above him, and behind her, a background that is empty. Just a total void. And I said to Tim, you're not going to like this, but I think you should not draw a background there. Let's just focus on her passion, her emotion, his passion, his finding what he was looking for. Just a moment with this woman that's not all aggression and horror. And boom, So that was slightly out of the comfort zone of someone who likes to really make every book like a diorama where you're looking into a stage and you see every detail. That's sort of the way, that's sort of the Vigil effect. It's a cinematic sort of effect.
Yeah.
It's even beyond cinematic. It's hyper cinematic, because he'll draw detail your eyes wouldn't be able to see. He'll draw minute background detail your eyes wouldn't be able to see.
It's funny.
If you were in that room as a living person in a living environment. So
It's
God bless him. He went for it, and there's no background in that scene. Look it up. It's
I reviewed several of the comics again last night. I don't have them all in my collection, so I got them digitally, and I actually ended up doing just that, partially because of your hand scripted writing for Dr. DeCamp. It was hard to read, so I had to blow it up, and then I started seeing details in the image that I'd never noticed before.
cool.
Holy cow, this is like 4K in a comic. It's crazy just how
Yeah. It's part of why it's part of why we all love him, right? You know, it's part of why we all love Tim's art and the journey he takes us on. So he had to like go out of his comfort zone to give me nothing.
Well, I've got to say, you made the right call.
Cool.
That was the scene on the rooftop where he finally takes her back to his place that she didn't know that he'd finished, where he finished his masterpiece artwork, and they make love in the rain, and that scene is, like you said, it's them actually making love. It's about her passion, and I like the kind of narrow focus on them, and especially her, and it really offsets all the horror that's mostly the backdrop of the series. So, good call. Totally agree.
Good. I like drama with my horror, and I like horror with my drama. Genre bending doesn't always work for everybody, and sometimes it's hard to sell, especially when you're at the conceptual level. But when you actually take the time to finish something, if you can do it well or close to well, if you can get 80% of what you wanted in the character arcs and the character voices, then if you can get at least that, hopefully more, but if you can get at least that, then sometimes you can include contradiction and opposition in the drama you're telling, light and dark, horror and passion.
Yeah. Some of the books I managed to pick up as I've been trying to collect the completed series over the years have been reprints, and the nice thing about that is sometimes I get notes from you or from other authors who've looked at the book, and they have their perspective on things.
I like that too.
Pardon?
Sorry. I like that too. We're trying to come up with what are the right things to put in the collected Faust.
Well, I love this description you have, like, because one of my ideas was like, what prompted you guys to do this way outside the line book? Because I had seen horror and even sexuality in comics, but it was the magazine rack things. It was Vampirilla, where you got violence and sexiness, but we didn't get like this level of violence and certainly not explicit sex. And I was thinking, like, what prompted these guys to do that? And you were talking about how you're just walking down the streets of New York and you're like looking around, deciding the character of the city, the character of the characters, and it's like we were both just really stubborn about the whole thing. You just really wanted to do it. So what was the inception for that? Why go to that degree? And how did Faust come about as a character? What was the inspiration? Or is it just one of those grand ideas that just popped in your head one day? There is a reference in one thing that, like, you had this idea, and Tim had sketched out this crazy character with some claws, and you kind of put the two together.
Yeah, that's that intimate collaboration I was talking about. We have some interests that we don't share, and then we have other interests that we do share. And so one of the interests that we definitely share, and I'll use the words of the fun director who directed the Faust film in 2000, Brian Usna. When we were working on the scripts and meeting some actors and stuff, Brian would get a draft of the script from me, and as he was starting to read it, he'd kind of be singing along to himself, and I was like, what are you singing? He was singing something that he had started singing with friends on another production, and it was coming back to him. with this Faust that he was working on, because I guess Faust was kind of like coming home for him in some ways. And he was singing hell and gore and twisted sexuality and over and over again. And so, all right, so that's that niche where Tim and I both want to tell stories. Always have, always will. It's not everything we do, but it's a big part of it. And so when we came together and we've done this Omega, we're going to finish that story. Okay. We've done the Omega and people responded, and, obviously some people started saying things like, oh, what about something more like Grips, right? Because for people who don't know Grips, it was kind of a proto-Faust.
Yeah.
It didn't have as many layers, and it wasn't as extreme, but it did have a berserker killer with razor sharp claws, right? So, not that that's unique in the world of horror. There's lots of examples, and there's, when we were kids, we were introduced to Wolverine, of course. That's another story altogether, but there was a place where we could meet. There was an idea of the killer. And I remember I talked about my off-Broadway experience, right? Mm-hmm. Plays about hell, plays about deals with devils. As a young man, that was kind of an obsession with me, I think. Everything I was writing was about, twisted father and son, mother and daughter, mother and son relationships, and everything I was writing was about, making deal with the devil. I was making a deal with the devil to go put on a suit and sell my services as a writer for business. And it was every day I was dealing with, they're going to catch me. They're going to find out who I really am, and they're just going to take away my ID, and I won't get paid all this money anymore. But they never did, because I was useful. So if you're useful to the devil,
is that where
that's where it came from? And Tim was spending a long visit in New York, so we were able to work together. We worked at our friend's house in Brooklyn, my house in Brooklyn. We walked around the village where I hung out and where I later lived. And when we started publishing, we did another long visit, and when we were doing our own publishing, starting with, after the tour in '90, basically we went back to just doing it all ourselves, because North Star was just a mess, and we never should have done it, but we did, so we had to get out. So, we were in that village neighborhood again when I was living down on Bleecker Street. So a lot of it was New York also. New York, like a lot of cities, lends its personality to what you're working on.
Oh, yeah.
People say that about LA, Paris, and I'm sure it's true of every city. Joplin, Missouri. It lends its character to what you're writing on.
Yeah, I mean, if you live in a place long enough, you get to understand it as a character itself.
Yeah.
And it's going to work its way into whatever piece of art you're working on. No doubt about that. Now, you're talking about the Faustian deals, your obsession with that, and I guess that would later on lead to you being attracted to characters in chaos like Purgatory and Lady Death. One thing I noticed upon rereading Faust in preparation for this was that, and it's a fundamental thing, nobody's a saint, nobody's completely virtuous, and in most cases, nobody is, just abjectly pure evil. Although in fiction, you can make cases for those things. But in reading Faust, I noticed the only character that I saw that didn't seem to have any sin, if you will, was a really detective Margolis, the one that looks like Elvis. He's the only character who seems to not be flawed in a really critical way, because you think you've got the very obviously the poor, completely screwed up Jaspers, who's been an assassin, who's made a deal with the devil. He works for M. M himself as a Satanist, and he's bound with all these other Satanists. You've got but even characters who are supposed to be protagonists, like Ron Balfour, he talks about, as a writer, you're talking about, he talks about like basically whoring himself out for his career, looking for that big score as a writer. And then even the person who's supposed to be altruistically helping John Jaspers, Jade, she breaks her ethical code by sleeping with her patient. And that's really, it's a gritty story, but that just makes it seem all the more real that everybody is more or less all the characters are flawed in some very meaningful way.
Flawed and hopefully nuanced.
Yes.
Some people may not imagine how I could use a word like nuance in something that becomes so extreme in terms of sexuality and violence. That's perhaps not nuanced, right? That's not subtle. But the characters are nuanced and conflicted. Mm-hmm. And as you're talking about Margulies, I'm thinking about him, and I'm thinking, oh, did we miss him? Did we miss his inner conflict? I don't know. We might have. Sometimes there's so many characters that some of the spear carriers in the back of the king don't have as much to show you what they could do.
I mean, he's a character in there, but he's not a POV character like Jaspers or M or Ron and Jade. They're all POV characters because you give them a voice outside of their speech. And that was also something else that I found interesting, was the fact that I had to reread the book several times as an 18-year-old. Because of the way you chose to structure your narrative. You didn't do the traditional comic book thing where you have the omnipresent narrator who fills in these little boxes to sort of tell you what's going on. 3:09 midnight, Jason walks slowly down the street, this sort of thing. And for Faust, for Jaspers, he is a very unreliable narrator, and it took me a while to figure out, because we didn't have the benefit of color, like with a character like Deadpool. He's got different colored boxes to denote the different schizophrenic voices in his head. It took me a while to pick up, like, is this one of his other voices? Is he saying this out loud? Is this all going on in his head? And so it definitely promoted rereading of the material several times, which is cool because, you just get deeper and deeper into it, trying to figure things out. But
question for you. Can I interrupt for a second? Here's something important to me. My question makes a point that I'm always trying to make. Mm-hmm. Did the material, content, story and art, words and pictures, did it invite repeated reading for more discovery, or did it simply force it and you were frustrated?
I can't say that I was frustrated. And remember, like, my first exposure to this is as an 18-year-old. And even though I'm a big horror fan, and I've read some of the more mature set, like Vampirilla and the other black and white horror mags that would come out on the racks. I grew up with like Marvel and DC, your Spider-Man, your Superman, all those kinds of guys. So this was a completely different experience. It was like, imagine if I'd been watching Disney Channel my whole life, and then my first adult movie is Memento, and then you get like a what? I've got to watch this again to see what's going on. And that was ultimately my reaction. And so I don't know if I would have been put off if not for the glorious artwork of Tim Vigil. Because initially the sex and violence was so great. I started to be like, oh man, I don't know. But doggone it, this art is so good, even if it's so graphic. And I ended up being a fan of heavy metal a little bit later on, and I was like, man, these guys should really be in there, where, like, in Europe they really get to cut loose and do whatever they want to.
It's it's possible that could still happen.
Love to see that.
We worked on a couple things that were, I think, were shown to heavy metal last year.
Nice.
We should maybe like find out who to call there. Like I said, we're always working on something. I'm gonna.
Does Kevin Eastman own heavy metal right now?
Not anymore.
Okay.
He owned it for a while, and he may be still involved in some capacity. But I think Kevin's mostly focused on his own art and some turtle-related stuff, which he's always kept a hand in. I worked for Tundra, by the way. You ever hear about Tundra?
Yeah, I have fond memories of Tundra.
90s comics history. I was one of the many, many people who were, interested in doing something a little bit different, and took some stories to Tundra, and Kevin welcomed them, so I wrote a few things. I think only one thing ever came out, though. Like a lot of things at Tundra stuff, a lot of stuff was not fully produced.
Yeah.
Like art wasn't finished, or editors changed, and that was it was a great party and good people and fun people to get to know a little better. Artists that I'd been reading for years and started to get to know as just like colleagues, like Mike Kaluta or Charles Vess or some of the other people I met because of Tundra. Kevin himself, fun guy, great guy. It's interesting that you mentioned that, can the book, and I suppose people will also start saying, will the adult animated TV series, hopefully, carry itself along just on hell and gore and twisted sexuality, or do we require nuances of character and some conflicts that are internal and stuff that may be a little bit interesting? I know one thing: you cannot stop and read a film or a cartoon. Even with technology that lets you stop it, it's just not the same thing.
No.
Most people won't be, stopping and rewinding the way we stop and reread. So that's going to be different, and that's going to affect the way the story is told. You don't control time as well, I keep saying you don't, but that's like, I'm thinking of cinema when I was a kid. I mean, obviously, you've got the fast forward button, and you've got all sorts of digital tools to watch faster, slower, backwards, whatever you want. But most people don't consume that kind of entertainment that way. We still sit down often with other people and share in watching a movie or a TV show in forward order without stopping.
Yeah. Yeah, I do, as somebody who is also a tremendous cinemaphile as well as a comic book geek, I am one of the rare people who will do that, just in case, because sometimes with animation, a lot of cool action's going on. It's like, oh, I got to see that again. I feel like I missed something. And as an anime fan, sometimes subtitles are running by very fast, so I will be that guy who, even if it breaks my immersion, I want to make sure I'm seeing everything as it was meant to be seen. So I might rewatch the scene a couple of times to make sure I get the words and the images. Now, what I hope for this Faust project is very much what I got out of Todd McFarlane's animated Spawn on HBO, where he had given up the lion's share of his control over his IP to get the movie made, and I feel like that was a mistake. I feel like, and I'm sure he feels like it's a mistake too at this point, which is why he wants to redo it his way. But he did, he set up his own animation and got it going, and then he did get to do it the way he really wanted to tell it. And I'm hoping that's what we get out of Faust, because that did have the adult content and the horror and the gore, but it also had all the depth and layers of the various characters of the story, and it came across as very meaningful. And especially when you get a top flight actor like Keith David to be your lead performer, who just elevates an already good project to the nth degree.
I should watch these. I've heard a few people say that it's worthy of
It,
their experience of being a fan of the comic. And that's what you want, right? You want to reach a new audience
mm-hmm.
and reach a broader audience, big as you can around the world, in a new medium. So you know there might be changes, but you also want to keep it true to the spirit and the soul and the spine and, you know, the feel of the original, even though it's in a new medium. Obviously, you know, finished adult animation will be adult, but it won't look exactly like as if the drawings in Faust Act 12 started to move. You know, it's going to be translated to an animation style. But see, we're already in on that conversation. It's early days, but the good news is, for those who don't know Matt Pizzolo, you should check out the things he's published or the film and TV work he's done or other things he's selling for other independent creators. He's been a Faust fan since I first met him 20 years ago, maybe more. I wish I knew exactly when I met him. I actually can't remember. We have to work that out. But he loved Faust for Faust. So when he bought it, he didn't buy it trying to say, we're going to change it and make it Spawn, or change it and make it, you know, Breaking Bad with knives, or whatever, you know, something. Think of something silly, and it's been thought of, you know. But he wasn't doing that. And we talked to a lot of other people over the years. A lot of people have tried to make inroads with making either a second film or a series for TV. And, you know, here was someone that could get it done, could convince Sony that it was vital and that it would work, and convince them that he had the vision to translate it to a new medium. So it's early days, but Sony knows what they bought.
Good.
Matt knows what he's in for, and Matt loves it. And, you know, Tim and I are at the table. We're not final decision makers, but we're creators contributing to all aspects.
Is he producing? Is that his role?
Matt Pizzolo, he's the producer.
Okay.
Yeah, and we are consulting producers, which is like someone that will be listened to, but someone, not the person who's calling the final shots.
How far into the process are you at? Do you have a direct voice cast, anything like that?
Oh, no, none of that. The best way, I think, for people to stay in the know as things happen is, you know, try to avoid the rumor mill and come to us. And I know you've been kind enough to share my blog with people, which they can follow, and then they get an email when there's news on the blog. And I know you've also shared Tim's Patreon, probably. Or if you haven't, go to Patreon and look for Tim Vigil. He controls that. You see, we don't control our social media. We contribute to it, but, you know, Facebook controls Facebook and Instagram. Twitter controls Twitter. I'm not sure about LinkedIn, but I think it's all based around, you know, mathematical algorithms and selling ads and selling subscriptions. So these little pure things like my blog, yeah, there it is. Good job. You guys are right on it.
Man in the chair.
Was that a mega force happening? I think
that was a mega force making it happen.
And that's the place to come to us. So we'll be honest. We'll tell you. Same with the Collective House. Well, you know, you could believe rumors, or you could make a bunch of drama about, you know, what you speculate is happening, but we're not going to announce it till it's scheduled and it's real, and we can promise it. Just like we did with the last two Fausts. You know, we didn't tell people they were coming out on date until they were going to hit that date, or, you know, within that month.
Now,
so, you know,
oh, please continue.
No, I think I said it already. Just thanks for sharing those places where people can come check us out.
Even if I wasn't a big Faust fan, I would want to, just as a reporter of this sort of material, we'd like to get it out there to as many fans as possible. You know, that's our whole goal at the Comic Crusaders. We are geek culture to the max, and we just want to share it with everybody else. Now, to a point you brought up, and a point I understand, and sometimes fans don't get it. But that's, what are you going to do? Geeks are going to be geeks, and I'm one of them. I understand. I've jumped to conclusions myself. Not
Oh,
going.
well, the drama about the drama is drama itself.
Yeah.
So the whole form of entertainment, I think of that as things like Bleeding Cool. It's like, well, some days the crazy over the top wild rumors about comics are more entertaining than some of the comics.
Oh God, if we as a species, humans are addicted to drama. That's for sure. Now you were talking about the changes made when you move from media to media, and that's unavoidable. You
Mhm.
can't, yeah, you can't compress a 1,000-page book into a 2.5-hour movie. And when you take something like Faust and you try and translate it into a single film, 15 issues of a comic book, that becomes difficult. And I did notice that you were the scriptwriter and you had another scriptwriter with you. And so I bring that up because I do have a question about that, because unfortunately I didn't enjoy the movie as much as I was hoping I was going to, because of the changes that were made. Now, the initial opening scene, I was so in on that. And I knew it didn't follow the plot of the comics exactly, but I still thought that was a great setup for the character. When Jeffrey Combs is coming in there, and John Jaspers is going on that killing spree, and they use the music to bring him out, bring him down, because music's very important in Faust, the comic book series. It's
Good
all
point.
over the place. Yeah, and you're really making a lot of interesting uh, uh, expressions and notations and observations with the music that you choose for the thing. So I really like that. But then as the movie went on,
Sorry about my dog.
that's okay. I've had a cat that's been bothering me for about half an hour. Uh, as the movie goes on, it seemed like it just kind of turned into Spawn. I was like, why is he growing a costume? And he's like, that's not what Faust is. And then like he was in the asylum because he was upset that his character or his girlfriend Blue died, and I was like, well, Blue was just the girlfriend of a junkie who died in like the first couple of pages. Why is she a character he's fixated on? So a couple of changes like that came across as really weird to me, especially when I look at Tim's art and I'm thinking like, Faust is this really fast guy because he can get up on you with his blades before you can get off a decent shot. And the costume, and I'm a big FX fan, but the costume looked just bulky and kind of weird for him. I didn't like the organic look. I kind of wish we could have seen something maybe a little bit more in the vein of like Batman '89 when it came out, something like that. But what are your thoughts on all that? Since you had a hand in some of that, and like how involved were you there with? And believe me, I'm a big fan of Brian Youn's work because I love Jeffrey Combs and I love all of his Lovecraftian adaptations. So he's top shelf in my book.
Yeah, well, we obviously trusted him as well. But, we knew there's a good chance that they could run out of time and money.
Hmm.
There's a good chance that the fact that, we had made the deal for them to do it and we could contribute to a point, but we were not the producers or the director. Now we're still not the director with the animated series, so this is going to be the same conversation. But I think we're starting first of all in a different time, right? Because Faust is now it's finished, it's
Yeah.
history. We've certainly done some work on other things that we could do with these characters. We don't quite have the right story to tell people about what it is. We're kind of still playing with it. But when I say finished, I mean, Love of the Damned, 15 acts. It's going to come out next year in a collected edition, and it's done. So there's the whole thing right there if you want to go to it. And that's what they've purchased, and that's what they're adapting. So it's adaptation. I'm not going to say I'm not going to say too much negative about the film. I always say we're proud it was made. There's some things that are great about it. It's fun. You know, it was great to have happen.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not great all the way through, that's what you get, and it doesn't change your experience of going back to the books and reading them again and having that wonderful movie in your head.
No, that's very true. I had the same reaction when I saw Spawn. It wasn't everything I hoped it could be, because I understand there's obviously, you know, when people are investing their money, they legitimately have a certain amount of say about what goes on. So that's fair. I just thought like some of the choices made, and this isn't to besmirch anybody who worked on the film or had a hand in the film, but I thought like looking at Faust, it seemed like it seemed like a film or a film that could have been made that could have translated very easily, because a great deal of the comic is a guy in a costume and you know, some gore effects. You can call in somebody like Tom Savini, you know. So again, for me, that's a bit of a pet peeve of mine. The suit was weird for me, but it's still a movie that's in my collection. So you know, I still like, yeah, every 5 years or so I pop it back in and kind of relive the whole thing all over again. But I still enjoy it. It's just like I thought it could have been a little bit more. But so I'm still
Part of what instigated Faust in the first place was
mm-hmm.
love of horror, love of drama, but
Yeah.
also anger about just living in a very repressed country. You know, we were really, you know, two young men with some anger about what we thought was hypocritical, and we were kind of exploding into a very extreme drama as a result. You know, fortunately, you know, let all your anger come out in creativity if you can, and don't actually kill people. You'll do much better in life, and you'll feel better about yourself. Also, here's another, you know, I sound Pollyanna-ish when I talk about positive things, right? Because there's so many things that are shitty, but
Mm-hmm.
the globality of entertainment today has helped dramas like Faust, not hurt it.
Yeah.
There are, I don't think there's a word in Japanese, for example, for, you know, for calling adult animation wrong. The way everyone jumped on, the minute they heard it was an animated thing, they thought, what? Teen Titans? Is there going to be like kid sidekicks? You know, and all they could imagine was, you know, old American comics, cartoons from 60 years ago. No, I mean, you know, the effect of Japanese animation and video games has helped us, not hurt us.
Oh
And
yeah.
so, I mean, and then there's even American examples. You know, Castlevania is not as extreme as Faust, but it paves the way. You know, shows like The Boys, it's not animated, but it paves the way. We're going into the transgressive. We're going into, you know, deconstructionists. We're going into the areas that are, you know, would have been taboo even in the late 80s when people started getting interested in making a movie of Faust.
Yeah, we're lucky enough to have actually had some stuff during that period here in the 80s. You know, we had things like Fritz the Cat, we had Metal, we had not American Graffiti, it might have been another Ralph Bakshi, but like some Wizards, a lot of adult.
American Pop.
Yes, American Pop, thank you. A
I
lot of,
don't. I didn't remember if that was R-rated or G-rated, but I thought it was intended for adults.
yeah, it's definitely adult, and it did have some violence in it. Not really the sex, but some violence. There was some World War II scenes that were very graphic and important to the story, and even a gentleman getting killed in a mob hit as he played his piano for the last time. Uh, so you know, it's there, and I kind of wondered, especially with your admission that you were fascinated by the idea of Faustian bargains and heaven and hell, specifically hell. If and now hearing that you had this sort of like anger at the hypocrisy, if a lot of this rose up, because I was a D&D player in the 80s, if part of the satanic panic brought about Faust in some way.
Yeah, and then it reacted to it.
Hmm.
There was a hard copy show that showed, like, are your children reading these comics? And then did Faust, Crow, Cherry Pop Tart. I didn't know any retailers selling children those comics, but hard copy had the video, so it must be true.
Yeah. It's on the TV. It's got to be true, right? That's how it is. I think
Yeah.
I think Faust probably led the way to a lot more adult fare. I mean, in one of your forwards, you write that thanks to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, it gained an acceptance of what might have been before been considered like, trash comics, these black and white comics, or they had to be the magazine format like the Vampirilla and others. But TMNT kind of opened the door for guys like you, and I think that your comic might have led the way for people to express themselves very viscerally, as James O'Barr did with The Crow, or as Bill Willingham did with The Elementals, which had sex and violence in that book as well. But it was all, the sex and violence wasn't just the point of it, obviously. It was made to be realistic in that way. And that's what I appreciate about it as my taste matured as I got older.
Yeah, it was definitely in that sort of group that sometimes some people call outlaw comics. And there's a writer named Clint Finley who's written about this, and the guys who have the video blog Cartoonist Kayfabe, they write about it and speak about it. It's like sort of in that era. You mentioned some of them, Faust, Crow. There's a book called Puma Blues. There was Cry for Dawn. There was Elementals.
Big fan of
I'm sorry if I'm forgetting something, and I'm probably like accidentally dissing a friend, but there was a lot of interesting stuff. There were two waves that happened. There was the obsessive, like, buying of black and white comics in great volume. That helped us, at least in the beginning, because every boom has a bust, and it later could bite you in the ass.
Mm-hmm.
But there were also, that and creator-owned publishing. Like, we were one of the early creator-owned publishers, but we certainly weren't the first, because I had been reading the guys from Puma Blues. I'd been reading Frank Miller. I'd been reading Alan Moore. I've been reading the people who did ElfQuest, the Peonies. There was like so many smart people, taking their business into their own hands. And I wish we'd done that from the beginning, Tim and I. We almost did. We took editorial into our own hands. We didn't have an editor, but unfortunately, we went with a publisher who decided he didn't have to pay us. So it took us a while to extricate ourselves from that situation, and then move on and self-publish. And because we started it at the time we started it, we could really make it work as a business. Things got harder in the mid-90s, obviously, after some of the factors I mentioned. And people have written more eloquently about the distributor wars and the boom and bust cycles of the 90s.
Mm-hmm. Now, have you guys thought about self-publishing in today's market the way that Indiegogo has been booming, especially with both new creators and well-established creators? And I remember like a project I was really excited for, because I'm also a big Stephen Bissett fan, and I'm also a big fan.
That's the one I forgot to mention. Thank you.
I was a big fan of his book Tyrant that ended after 3 issues because
and Spider Baby, or whatever that anthology was called.
Spider Baby Graphics.
Great stuff.
Oh, geez.
Thank you. You right it or wrong.
I used to hang out on his forum, and I really enjoyed talking to the man quite a bit. And I have as an artist, I have a great love, just not of the 4-color comics, especially as the digital coloring has really advanced and is getting superlative. But I like to see those black and white lines, and still, I'm happy to see people like Terry Moore putting out Stranger with Paradise or Jeff Smith's Bone. And so this book of Bissett, I kind of wish, and if you're listening, Steve, I would love for you to put this book back out, man. Try and crowdfund it. Indiegogo seems to be the place to be. Have you guys considered going a route like that, perhaps, as a guy who got a fan base?
Yeah. Okay. So 8 years ago, we finished Faust, right? And
Hmm.
I immediately started to look for uh, a legit publisher. First, I was working only within independent comics, outside of outside of the work for hire publishers like
Hmm.
DC. And eventually, I even went to book publishers, because book publishers now are the distributors. Penguin Random House is in the process of taking Simon Schuster into its company, and those are the two biggest distributors now. So comics are going to be distributed by those guys.
Hmm.
So I went to them too. But I have to admit, after, maybe it's just the times we're in, we're the retrograde culture we've had the last 5-10 years in some ways. But I had a lot of initial interest from several publishers wanting to be our distributor. So it would be a rebel and kind of thing, a co-publication. Because that's really the way I wanted to go. Because, we've got the money to print the book. We don't have a team to distribute the book, especially those reorders. And when Tim and I were first self-publishing, we both had little spaces set up in our houses and apartments and stuff, and then we could send out 1 book, 3 books, 5 books. I don't have that anymore. I don't have that dedicated space. I don't want to take that time. I don't want to be the freight forwarder. I want to have a real, publisher that's set up to do that on a global basis. Well, the good news, we found one, and when we can announce it, we're going to announce it, and you're going to hear about a schedule. But it was not easy. Everyone wanted to have the chance to be part of Faust as history, Faust as fun, Faust as good business, Faust as news. Publishers could all salivate a little bit for that, but they also just didn't want to have our extreme content show up next to some other things and perhaps, get them in trouble.
Hmm. And that's especially since the rise. Yeah, I don't want to mention what gave rise to it, but we know what we're talking about. I don't want to be political here.
It's a natural cycle. I'm not even being political. I think things pendulum back and forth, right?
Well,
it doesn't matter who's politics and poker. Shuffle off the cards and find the joker.
Yeah, the thing is, there's been enough people who've gotten into it now that they have basically worked out the kinks, and so I've watched the evolution of it because I've purchased several books from several different creators, both these new young upstarts, up and comers, as well as some guys who've just made the transition away from the larger companies to doing their own thing quite successfully. And now there's a pretty broad base of people who you can ask if you ever wanted to go that route, and they've made the mistakes like, here's the best way, I use this for
Sure.
distribution and all that. But it's pretty crazy when I think back that this is being done now on a tremendous scale and very efficiently. And I think back to Dave Sim, man, just mailing his books out one at a time, all by himself, getting service out there.
Yeah, well, Dave had the same advantage we had in our beginning of, 6 or 7 distributors,
Mm-hmm.
easy access to most other countries. It was a little different then. And as far as Kickstarter and other things like that, Tim has Patreon. That's new. That was
Yeah.
the old dog got a new trick. And hopefully it'll be the great way for people to, there you go, thank you, connect with Tim in a space that he controls, and it's not controlled by Facebook or Instagram's censorship. And I do the same thing for a smaller crowd over at the blog. And, I researched Kickstarter and all that when I first heard about it. I was excited. It did seem like an awful lot of that shipping things out one by one by one. And I didn't know who was going to be our partner in that.
Mm-hmm.
But if that had been our only way, like say if I couldn't afford to print the book, if that had been our only way, I'm sure I would have talked to a few people that are doing it well. Like, let's look at this. I mean, Brian Pulido makes his living from crowdfunding his books successfully to his hardcore readers and readership in his world. He's always known who his audience is.
Yeah.
And I'm a little schizophrenic with my audience. One day I'll be doing this for your grandchild, and then the other day I'll be doing, that.
Just means you're versatile, man. Well, since you brought Pulido, let me ask you this. So I was going to ask you what attracted you to Lady Death in Purgatory, but since you have this this fascination once again with these Faustian bargains and the culture of hell, if you will, it makes a lot of sense as to why these two were appealing to you. Do you have a favorite between the two characters?
Oh, interesting. I don't know. That's kind of like, I mean, they're not my children, but they come from a tradition that I'm at home with, right? These are archetypes.
Did you enjoy writing one more than the other?
I don't know. Maybe Purgatory is a little bit my personality.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I found I wanted to do things with Lady Death that were a little too human. And, Brian loves his babies, so he would just very carefully remind me, she's not human.
I can understand why you want to go there, because if you look at her origins, she starts out very sympathetic before she goes from just being another damn soul to Lady Death incarnate.
Mm-hmm.
So I can see why you'd want to go there. Now, again, I'm not here to throw a bad light on anybody, but I am curious about this because I had a friend who worked with Brian for a very long time, Jay Photos, a colorist, and he was there when he was there when Chaos crashed, and he has opinions about what went on, especially since he considered Brian a friend. I'm just wondering, how was your working relationship with Brian?
That was great. I knew what I was in for. Just like when I wrote Doctor Strange for Marvel or Vampirella, which was controlled by Harris at the time.
Mm-hmm.
You have to know who you're working for.
Okay.
Brian wanted me to write my kind of stories for his characters. It worked for a time. The whole industry was getting smaller, and it was time to make a change. And so it was ended. And I never got into anything adversarial. He's not one of the many, many, many people I've written for that didn't ever pay me. I mean, he paid me, And so that's when you do work for hire, one of the important things is getting paid, because you're never going to own the character or control it. So respect to people who pay, because that's that's kind of the only promise they make that they really have to keep.
Mm-hmm.
It's still their baby. It's their thing. It's the same. I'm thinking a lot about Doctor Strange these days, because I've been trying to provide some stuff on the blog and on Instagram to share, like some behind the scenes and some interesting things that happen. Those were very, very fun to write, but never for a second did I think, oh no, this is mine and I own it and I control it and I'm going to do this forever. It's good. Businesses are going to change. Staff, the staff was decimated a lot more than I thought it would be, but I knew the staff would change,
mm-hmm.
and things would change. And look how many times he's changed since. Plus, I mean, that book, wonderful character. And you see from the success of the movie how much there is to work with if you get the right people and is telling the story and acting and all that. But, there's something that kind of makes, I would say, the Nick Fury and Doctor Strange and a few other characters sort of like kind of hard for them to sort of carry their own monthly book for a long time.
Mm.
You know, they can go through an interesting couple of years and then it's got to change up. Or an interesting couple of years and then retailers stop ordering or order so little that Marvel gets the idea, hey, put our resources somewhere else, cancel it for a while, we'll bring it back. They're doing that again now. So, you know, I was kind of around at the end of one period, which sort of crashed in what they call the Marvel-cution, when the company like decimated itself in the mid-90s. And then they had a renaissance and they came back. It's funny, you know, we used to, among the staff and the regular writers who would like come in for meetings and summits and things like that in the early to mid-90s, we were really hoping that someone like Sony or Disney would buy Marvel and all the problems would go away. But it didn't happen for a long time. And I don't even know if all the problems have gone away because I'm actually not doing work for hire right now.
Yeah.
I never say never, but I'm not pursuing any of that. So I've been having a fun time telling people about the Doctor Strange that comes out next year. This is actually the time to pre-order it. If people are hearing this and they want to learn more, they should, you know, let their retailer know they want it. It was a fun time. It was a good work for hire experience. I did about 3 years of stories for them, and about 2/3 of them are coming out in one book. This big fat Doctor Strange Sorcerer Supreme Omnibus 3 on Groundhog Day.
I saw that. As a matter of fact, this is a perfect transition because I wanted to ask you about your work on Doctor Strange. You came in being a horror fan as well as a classic Marvel fan. I was more of a Marvel fanboy as a teenager, and as a child, I was more of a DC fanboy. So interesting psychological bump there, you know. But you came in during one of my favorite periods. It was the bringing back of Ghost Rider and all this. It was the Marvel getting back into horror a little bit, but in the context of superheroes, but in a little bit more, dare I say, friendly way than, say, something like a Faust. So you were right there for the very first overarch of the Midnight Suns with Doctor Strange Sorcerer Supreme number 60. And I noticed right away that you were taking Doc on a ride. He was dealing with like massive anger issues. He ended up getting split off into several splinter characters, including the very fascinating Strange, this mystical juggernaut that had none of his finesse but all of his power. And then later on, as he kind of reintegrates, gets everything back under control, you actually modernized him in a way that I thought was pretty darn cool for the 90s.
Well, thanks. I mean, I tried to give it like my voice and my kind of conflict, but I also tried to give it to a character that I had loved since 1974, and follow in that tradition and keep true to that legacy. So I did enjoy having him go through crisis, that personality crisis we talk about. Mm-hmm. Since it's all in the past and it's not at the time it was a mystery. It's just like, Strange is different and he's not talking and his face is covered, but he's not. Last time he covered his face in books I saw drawn by Gene Colan, he still was a human covered in his face. Mm-hmm. This thing, like, the Hulk can squash it with both feet and it'll sploosh all over like a puddle and reform. Yeah, not that that's unique, but obviously he's like made of something that's not human. So, I mean, first that was a mystery. But now that the mystery's been told and you see it's one of those doppelganger stories, although it's 3, not 2, right? And this has been done in mythology, tons of different kinds of stories. It's been made into comedies about twins, but it's also been made into horror stories about alternate selves, you know, false doubles. And so we had a false triple because the idea of Trinity was appealing to me, and the idea of one being sort of like, you know, all soul energy, the other being a petty human, and the other being, something, just a body, you know. Anyway, I wish I actually had the proposal. When they invited proposals from several creators and I sent one in, it was written very quickly and very instinctively, and then I got to do something with it for 2.5, 3 years. So it was, it was a great experience, and it was one of those challenges where you get to really understand what long form storytelling is about. Kyle Holt's art, awesome.
So
long form storytelling is, as someone smarter than me said, like presenting the surprising in a way that's familiar. You're constantly making the illusion of change, the illusion of something different and something new. But it's always got to come back to the satisfying, comic book or long form TV or soap opera type, status quo. So everyone who gets into that job, writing Doctor Strange for a few years, or taking on the Hulk for a few years, or Superman, Nightwing, whoever, someone else is going to want you to put everything back reasonably, and when you're done with it. So it's an interesting discipline, and it's all part of that work for hire idea. Of just being okay with that and knowing what you're doing, and then that's what the guys like Bissett and Dave Sim and Alan Moore helped us, creators of my generation, and like just right after them. We had the advantage of learning from them the lessons that they learned, and the lessons that people before them learned, of maybe forgetting that lesson, forgetting that, you don't own it. You're never going to own it. If you sign something with them that gives them ownership, you really don't own it, even if you emotionally own it, And so we had extra wisdom because of what those guys trailblazed and how they taught us.
Yeah, that's a critical point to make. As an artist, I have many times been in that position myself, with the complete understanding that work for hire, you never know if something you're going to work on is going to blow up, and you got paid to do a job, and that's all there is to it. Now, I could tell that you were a longtime Doctor Strange fan, and here's how I could. One of your strangers, you named him Vincent, and the lore is that they named that Doctor Strange was based on Vincent Price. And I was wondering if you were aware of that, and I feel like you are.
Yeah.
I
There's all sorts of fun stuff in that you get to do. Mm-hmm. And it's like what Harvey Kurtzman called chicken fat in Mad. All the little fun, crazy stuff that didn't need to be there in the story in Mad. It's great, early Mads. But, it was the chicken fat. It's the little flavor. Just like, that window that Ditko designed of the Bleecker Street Sanctum Sanctorum. I made it a geomagical sigil with a name and a history because I could. It's the Anomaly Rue. I think I'm probably the only person who uses that still.
I think you are, but I love that you did that. Just like I love seeing writers put in like these little Easter eggs, and I love the same thing from artists. Going back and reviewing Faust, which I hadn't looked at in a few years.
Oh my God, Faust!
Well, I loved, like for instance, for instance, Lisner. He'll do this a lot. Way off in the background, you might see Superman or Batman or somebody like this, and I loved seeing that. That Vigil kept putting names of artists that he really liked. Like
his
on
backgrounds have so much
documents.
character. So much character in Tim's backgrounds. I love it.
Like Jade is flipping through this file cabinet for Jasper's folder, and there's Gil Kane and John Buscema. I love it. I love stuff like that.
Tim and I are even in one of the which one is it? We're in one of the Wrath books.
Nice.
I think it's the Wrath book. We're like taking a walk, couple of guys walking in the park, and
See, I used to dig when Marvel would do that too. Like you would just catch a, if you were in the know enough to know what people in the bullpen look like, every now, hey, there goes Bobby Chase in a scene, you know.
Right.
There's Jim Shooter in the background over there. That used to just tickle me to death. So I
It's
love
funny. You're putting your finger on something that's really, I don't know. It's kind of unique to comics, isn't it? That you can have.
I mean, the closest thing.
Little visual in jokes in the middle of a story, and the story's proceeding at its own pace, but all these little Easter eggs can pop up.
I
guess you could have that in a film too, but I often miss those unless they're really, really obvious.
You will get it in the Marvel films. I mean, the most obvious example are all the Stan Lee cameos. Mm-hmm. But especially James Gunn is notorious for this. In his Guardians of the Galaxy films, he puts in so many delightful little Easter eggs, like having in the collector's room, Adam Warlock's cocoon is in one of his trophy cases. And I was just kind of whooping when I saw that thing.
Yeah, that I didn't miss, but I miss lots of things.
Mm-hmm.
You read these articles people publish, and it's like, did you know that the license plate of the third police cars
says I'm a fan, but I'm no fanatic. Like when you're putting in something that tiny, like in the on Star Trek: The Next Generation, like one of the mini panels they have, there's like a rubber duck icon. Just because like it's almost impossible for somebody to notice, but eventually somebody does, and then we all get tickled over it.
You know, it's a little bit like I wanted to thank you for mentioning the music in Faust, the way that we quoted songs, threw things in, and there's some in there that are very carefully worked out as part of the script.
Now, did you write
beginning like Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, which exists?
So as a musician, did you write some of those songs, or some of those your songs?
One is mine. One More Notch in the Gun.
Rosebuds? The one the Rosebuds are singing?
Yeah. But anyway, what I was trying to say was there's something that happens in a song that it's working on the level of thinking and feeling simultaneously. And it's almost like we encode our own emotions on songs. So if Papa's Got a Brand New Bag may mean to you exhilaration, life, chaos, and perhaps a little fear. I don't know, maybe that's only me, but the first time I heard that song, the space between all the instruments was striking. And what it was to me was it actually had an eeriness to it. You know, you could dance to it, but yet there's a lot of space in that song. And then maybe I was just used to music that had less space in it, you know, like silence and rests and people playing instruments together, but often one at a time and taking turns, call, response, well, you know. So anyway, that's an emotional thing that works in the reader's mind, and it's a very fun thing to play with. And we're not the only people that have done it, but you know,
yeah.
I noticed that maybe it's something generational because there was something about. I guess I saw Alan Moore do it a few times.
Mm-hmm.
And, he's a little older than me, but not a lot, not enough to be my dad. And you know, and then suddenly it seemed to be something that people my age were doing a bit, and then afterwards, it just took over everything. Now there's it's almost expected on many television shows that there's going to be a lot of songs and silent scenes where only the song is handling the emotion. Of course, you're watching actors, but you're watching pantomime.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been kind of an interesting change in storytelling. And I hope when we do animated, we can actually play with some of this music.
Yeah, I was about to mention, I hope you really get the licensing for Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, because that is so iconic to the character of the singing slasher, like
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't imagine Faust doing his thing without him, just riffing those lyrics as he's going to town and, having fun, letting loose as his alter ego. It's
Well,
so iconic to him in my mind.
nice. And I'm glad you say that, but it makes me almost interrupt you. Sorry, with the question.
Oh,
Um, the um, the impact it had at the time was that it was something kind of new, not completely new. Obviously, nothing was new completely, but something kind of new. But now, like I said, there's so much of that on TV, so much use of music and quoting of music.
mm-hmm.
So much so that even like as someone who dabbles in this still, I also like try to work on my songwriting and work on studying songwriting. And sometimes I look at blogs about songwriting. And, there's blog articles about, the huge industry of selling your songs to TV to be used in shows. So that's just the weather out there is like, it's a big thing. So my question to you, finally, is it going to seem new now? And does it matter? Or is it going to seem like, well, yeah, of course there's music that's slightly ironic and dramatic. Everything does that now.
I mean, I see where you're coming from. I would not hate the show if it didn't have it. But I think because I'm not a new fan, I'm not your new audience, because I'm your old audience. I think I'll have a reaction similar to I did with Lord of the Rings, where to me and my wife, who read all the Tolkien books, and grew up watching the wonderful Ralph Bakshi animated films, which included a lot of the music, the songs that Tolkien had written out, and they just really kind of livened up those scenes dramatically. And we were disappointed that more of that music didn't make it into the film. And so, at least for the Hobbit, I was really overjoyed to see the dwarves start singing "That's What Bilbo Baggins Hates" as they're throwing his plates all over the place. So I'm sure I'm going to enjoy the new project regardless, but I really hope you guys can license at least Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, because I want to see that so much. And I wanted just like that the riffs to be overlaid behind him as the voice talent is singing the song as he's going on his murder spree.
Yeah, all right.
It would be so great, because that's
Thank
how
you for indulging me on that. Yeah, I appreciate it. You talk about you're one of our old fans. What
I'm 50.
What else are you really into? I've heard roots in DC, love The Hobbit, and all of Tolkien, I suppose.
Oh man,
what else do you love?
I am like the conglomeration of all things geek, nerdy, cool. I am, as I've mentioned,
I have to explore Comic Crusaders more.
Yeah,
when we got in touch, I did a little research and looked around, but I have to really study you guys and enjoy your content. Go ahead.
I'm 52 years old, so I grew up in the 70s. So that's where the DC comics came in more than anything else. And as I matured, I graduated into Marvel, because DC felt more like a fantasy and Marvel felt more real. And then as I got into my adulthood, even though I still read Marvel up until very recently, I started exploring more and more independence, because there's a part of me that wanted that realism, even as I enjoyed the fantasy of Marvel Comics, which was closer to real to me than DC. So that's where I come from there. I am a voracious reader, a voracious consumer of movies. I am a huge fan of kaiju, Godzilla being the best, of course, and all things Suitmation, Star Wars fan, Star Trek fan, Space 1999 fan. I love hard sci-fi, like Asimov, but I like silly sci-fi like Douglas Adams, which is still surprisingly intellectual for something that's so farcical.
Oh yeah.
I am all over the place. If it's fun, I'm kind of there. Video games, just everything. That's why like coming to the Comic Crusaders was a no-brainer for me because they kind of cover all of that.
I'm going to look forward to learning more by checking
Uh,
out the rest of your content.
I am a tremendously eclectic nerd. Thank you for
Uh, I love nerds, and it's a good time. It's a good time for my 15-year-old daughter to be the kind of nerd she wants to be
mm,
without having to be apologetic about it at all. Her
yeah.
generation doesn't even apologize the way people over 50 do. And you don't really apologize, but you kind of like make it socially acceptable by saying, I know I'm a nerd. But, like, you know, people that much younger than us, like her generation, wow, they're just like, you know, they're able to talk about their love of manga and anime and what kind of pop they like, and just everything.
Oh, it was great.
It's a great time. It's fun. That's what I'm saying. It's a great time for it.
It is. I was like, I think the only one who still looks at me strange when I talk about I run like 3 D&D games a week is my mom. she's the only one who can't let it go. It's like, what's wrong with you?
I'm working on this other book. I can't say a whole lot about it yet because it really hasn't been announced, but I'll talk about the process. I'll talk about part of what we love about it. I'm working on it with my friend, been a friend for years, but this is our first project together. Vincent Zerzola, who is one of the owners of Metropolis Comics, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, like, classic comic sales organization here in New York.
Hmm.
So he has just got he's a lifetime of all things geek, and being an evangelist in the best sense of the word for geek culture, pop culture. And he's one of the people that helped make it more socially acceptable and not something you've got to hide. Like, I will hide my comics inside this porn, and then people won't think I'm a geek, or whatever. So, we're working on this book called The Addiction, which is about basically a crime comedy about fighting drugs with drugs.
Yeah.
And it's
I'm already liking the premise.
a little twisted, but it's meant for teens and adults, and no one's going to call it super extreme, right? It's something that's trying to reach sort of a less extreme edge. So it can be about something real, and it can be about something adult, but it won't have something, in your face that's maybe going to make you not want to share it or talk about it or get enthusiastic about it. So because I like telling stories like that, we have a character in that, and this is why I mentioned this story, that and the fact that I'm enthusiastic about something I'm working on. There's a character in the story who is embracing all things fandom. Loves anime, loves food, loves TikTok and YouTube. I mean, he's like embracing all of that. And he's always trying to make a fusion of things. Like, I'll be a singing boxer. The world needs boxers that also sing, or I'm going to design my own celebrity pasta and manufacture it.
You just gave me the weirdest flashback talking about the singing boxer. I just flashed back to the Danny Kaye film where he was the dancing boxer.
So, God, let's love our fandom, right?
Mm.
Obviously, you embrace it. You've made a life of it. You've made a business of it. So have I, in my own way. So, I mean, let's embrace it.
I agree. I agree, and I love the fact that like I was I was never ashamed of it, other than getting reproachful looks from my mother. uh,
Oh,
it never bothered me to talk about these things with uh, my adult friends growing up or anything like that, and
right, right.
or even like girls I was going to date before I eventually met my wife. And if they weren't into it, that was fine. If they were, that was super great. And fortunately, I found a woman who was also a voracious reader, so we had a great foundational commonality right there.
Yeah, you don't need to be with someone who's exactly like you, but you do
Mhm.
need to be with someone that's as passionate about something as you are about what you're passionate about.
Yeah,
Otherwise, you're alien to them, and they are alien to you.
no, it's good because we balance out each other well. Because like she's got,
Beautiful.
it's like you talking about Tim. You and Tim, your working relationship. You got things you're into. He's got things he's into, and you guys meet somewhere in the middle. Let's see if I have any more questions I haven't gotten around to just yet.
Hmm.
Because I think we actually got to hit a lot of the stuff that I had written down just in the course of conversation. You would wonderfully just kind of bring it up all by yourself, and I was able to transition right into it.
It's what I do. It's what I'm thinking about.
Well, that's good.
A lot of what I worked on during COVID has not been scheduled to be published yet. I wrote several comics things, including this addiction, which I'm starting to talk about because we'll be able to announce it soon. What we don't have is we're actually offering illustrators the chance to work with us. We don't have an illustrator. And it has to be someone who can do a kind of a special job. It's actually someone who can draw a book that is a Trojan horse. It's like the story of the Trojan horse is it looks like a giant, colossal gift horse, but it's actually deadly warriors coming out to kill you in the middle of the night. So this book doesn't want to kill you, but it does want to kind of ambush you by looking a little bit like a crime comedy book that you might see at, Marvel or DC on the surface, but then having kind of an underlying danger about being something kind of dangerous, and having that same transgressive quality of Faust or the Wrath, although less sexually extreme. So, I mean, it's a lot for an artist to sort of, you got to kind of look like Batman, but be willing to be something that also gets like horror and scary and deals with a little bit of tragedy and a little bit of comedy. So it's demanding.
I did
So,
think something that was interesting about Faust's design, because in silhouette he does look very much like Batman. I'm glad to
yeah.
see that wasn't a problem for you. But
Well, I mean, they both have the roots in the same thing,
yeah,
And the Shadow is another character kind of like that, and
very obviously,
other pulpy characters, and the gargoyles that people used to put on buildings to be the drain spout, but also to have some sort of significant kind of like
supposed to,
protection.
yeah, supposed to scare
Building.
evil spirits.
Yeah, yeah.
Are you actively seeking submissions right now? And if so, where can people submit to for the addiction? To send samples, or
Oh,
send you
yeah.
links?
People want to send a couple of samples of storytelling pages that they think could work for a book that kind of looks like a crime comedy, but actually has some, druggy, scary drama under the surface. Um, they're welcome to like find my blog and go to the page that's contacts, and like, hit me with an email. Just let me see something. We've looked at a lot of people. We talked to a few people. Some looked like they really could do it. I mean, there's lots of people that could do it, right? And the trick is finding someone who has the time to do it, and they're not already doing, monthly at another publisher that they don't want to step away from, because that would be a risk for them,
Yeah.
I mean, I've got like track record of comics that people like, and a TV show that's in development, and other kinds of publishing I'm doing. So it's not as much a risk as like, starting a band in your garage all by yourself. But it is a risk. I mean, if you're drawing, say, a monthly book for Marvel or DC, you can't really see the business logic in jumping ship on that right now. So,
All right. So all you freelancers and hopefuls out there, this is your chance to work with a legend. I'm probably going to cook up a couple of pages myself. This sounds like a very interesting artistic challenge to be satirical and a bit gritty and spooky at the same time.
Wonderful. That's nice. Or if you just want to see what I'm thinking about.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I try to sometimes I just say, okay, this blog should be a little bit about pop culture, and I'll take a day and say, this is my biography in movies. There's 15 movies that made me, or then I might other times go back and reread Faust and pick out quotes that I think are memorable and something that could actually help you to think about when you're in life, and I make an article about that, or simply tell a little story about something that's happened in my creative life or personal life. It's not intensely personal. I don't, you might occasionally see a picture of my daughter or my dog, but we have certain things that we don't.
Yeah, that's
divulge all of the home stuff.
That's definitely fun, and you've been a very engaging and fun person to talk to. And for somebody who's not extremely active on Twitter, a blog post is great. For instance, I follow Jim Shooter's blog, and it's just kind of an invaluable resource, just to go back and learn about what he's thinking these days, as well as what he used to think about back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s forward. So that's a good thing, guys, out there. If you want some good information, please check out Mr. Quinn's blog and see what he's doing, because a lot of artists are giving you what they're thinking day to day on Twitter, but the casual nature of a blog just kind of really lets you get into those deep thoughts and experiences and kind of put them out there, and you can sort of process what you're saying. Whereas Twitter can end up being the fast food versus the 8-course meal.
Well, the discipline I'm trying to learn with the blog is not to be a perfectionist.
Mm-hmm.
Like sharing something true is better than taking a long, long time to try to write something that's super developed and still true, and then hardly ever publishing anything. So I've gone through long periods where I just don't post anything new at all, and that's bad. That's like, well, now you're letting people down. You're inviting them to come somewhere, and you don't show up. So what I try to be is less perfectionist and post more often. And I go in and out still, but I try.
Well, I think I've exhausted my list of questions, unless there's anything else you'd like to talk about.
No, we talked about pretty much everything that's on my mind that I can talk about. We're enjoying continued interest in things we did a while ago with like Doc and Faust, and we're enjoying new ideas every day and new projects that we'd love to get scheduled with a publisher and tell you all about soon.
Right. Well, everybody, for Comic Crusaders, this has been Jeff Bracey and, of course, David Quinn. And David, once again, thank you so much for agreeing to this interview. This has been an absolute blast. And especially for me, as I cannot state this enough, how I've been a longtime Faust fan, actually getting to meet the other half of that grand collaboration.
All right. Thanks so much. I've enjoyed it too. And oh, God, you got to love fandom. So you just have to, we're all fans, and we all have to fly that freaky fandom flag high.
That's right. All right. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. We hope you've enjoyed this Comic Crusaders production. For real-time news on all things pop culture, please feel free to follow us on social media. For articles, original content, merchandise, and more, please go to www.comiccrusaders.com. Also follow along with all of the websites in the Comic Crusaders family. As always, if you like this content, please click like and subscribe to the Comic Crusaders YouTube channel.